I'm Dr. Tuttle. This is the Diabetes Cause and Correction Health Talk, and thank you all for coming tonight. I like to start off with a little video by Dr. Joe Mercola because he gives a good introduction into the basic problem that we're dealing here with diabetes. And I, like Dr. Mercola, have chosen to do this health talk just because there's so many people that have diabetes, and it just ravages the body. And it really just sickens me how this problem is being treated. The typical medical model for treating diabetes, and how diabetics in general are being treated, and that's why I'm doing this, because we're going to look at how the medical community is treating this disease, what's being done about it, what's being taught about it. But I think what we can all agree is whatever they're doing isn't working, because the rates are skyrocketing, and it's obviously not getting any better. But that's really what sickens me, is because we get what we pay for. If they really wanted to cure diabetes, it's just like anything else. It would be gone. The fact that it's getting worse actually plays into their pocketbook and their profit margin. And as we're going to learn, diabetes is just an absolute cash cow. And so I personally believe that it's being done on purpose, because this disease is so prevalent, and it's just so damaging. And they don't tell people there is a cure for it. They don't tell people that there's a cure for it. They don't tell people that it's curable. And what happens is that these people their bodies get ravaged by a disease. People never get better. They only get worse, and spreading to more and more people like it's an infectious plague, which is great, because then they can make money off more and more of the population, and because they make you believe that there's no cure for it, things are only going to get worse, and because it's so damaging, it's going to ravage the rest of your body, create tons of other complications, so that you can get more and more drugs and more surgery and more medical intervention. And it's an absolute cash cow, which is why I think it's deliberate, the way that they're handling it, as far as educating people about what causes it. And it's almost ironic. They act like they don't know what causes it. And so that's where we're going to kind of start. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I want to back up a little bit and say, well, what is diabetes? And there's a great article here by Dr. Ron Rosedale. This is from Mercola.com, and he talks about it very well, better than I do, so I put this up here. This article calls it "Doctors Cause Diabetics to Die." And you notice that this is an acronym that stands for something, but it's also a very powerful message, and it's very true. And that's why Ron Rosedale and Mercola and myself and many others, we're just really all fired up, because the basic plan that you get to when you go to a medical doctor, and they're screening early for it now because they know it's so prevalent, they want to just get you on this treatment and start you early, is it's going to kill you. There's absolutely no hope of ever getting better. And they know that it's just a matter of time before it ravages the rest of your body. And their interventions are basically geared towards treating the symptoms, controlling it to keep you alive long enough to take all your money and let the disease ravage the rest of your body, so that you can start getting diabetic neuropathy, blindness, end-stage renal disease, immune system dysfunction, and of course cardiovascular problems and heart attacks, and they know it's all going to do this, and so it's really just disgusting. But what Ron Rosedale says is that this is just kind of an intro. It talks about how he's an expert on leptin physiology, which leptin's a hormone you may not have heard of, but if you it's just word association. If I say diabetes, what's the hormone you think of? Insulin, right? Diabetes, insulin, diabetes. Insulin's not really the primary player in diabetes. It's actually primarily leptin, which is kind of interesting. Leptin's a very powerful and influential hormone that has totally changed the way science looks at fat, nutrition, and metabolism. Let me see if I can make it more larger so it's easier to read. Not quite that large.
Okay, what he says is that there was a new study that was done, I think last month, which follows a similar one that was done, a couple months prior to that. It reveals the inadequacy and ineptitude of current traditional treatment for diabetes. Okay, this article indicates the recognition that finally so-called type 1 diabetics are also frequently acquiring type 2, and that type 2 diabetics are much more frequently acquiring type 1. As is so frequently the case, rather than indicating a cause, hold on to that thought, rather than indicating a cause and trying to get to the root of this, it's much easier to give this constellation of symptoms a new name, type 3 or double diabetes. Okay? Since obesity and diabetes are so often found together, they're now calling it diabesity, diabetes, because they're so common. Names are meaningless unless they pertain to a cause. Much more appropriate names for type 1 and type 2 would be insulin deficient and insulin resistant. Okay? Stressing the importance of insulin signaling in this disease. Okay? Now this is kind of neat right here. He says that the progression and deterioration of so-called type 1 and type 2 diabetics into one another should be more appropriately called doctor-induced exacerbation, or DIE. Doctor-induced exacerbation means your doctor's making it worse. And that's why everyone's so upset about this, is that the doctors are actually making it worse. And this is a real killer, because it's almost an unrelated topic. I was talking about something else earlier today, but most of you know that the Journal of the American Medical Association, they admitted that the third leading killer in the United States. We know that truly they're actually the #1 cause of death. And something that really just kind of confirms this, I mean, other than the scientific evidence which I've presented to you that proves it, something else that proves it is why is it that every time the doctors go on strike, the death rate drops dramatically? If your medical doctor would just stay home and go on vacation, more people would live. And we see this over and over. I know it happened back, when I was in California, the doctors went on strike and the death rate dropped by 18%. The doctors went on strike in Israel, the death rate dropped 35%. Same thing in Canada. I mean, it's just radical, and so the doctors, die. They cause them to die, doctor-induced exacerbation. And so he talks about how I've been incensed about traditional treatment of diabetes for decades. Diabetics have been told that they can eat multiple meals a day that turn into sugar, and even sugar itself, as long as they take enough insulin to lower their blood sugar. The importance of limiting the intake of sugar and foods that turn into sugar has almost totally been ignored. I want to say this again. Foods that turn into sugar. Don't believe the hype about how, but they're complex carbohydrates, they're good for you. Baloney. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. I'm not saying you have to avoid carbohydrates 100%. I'm just saying it's not an essential part of your diet. Okay, protein comes from the Latin root proteus, which means of primary importance. And your fats, like your essential fats, your essential fatty acids, are just that. They are essential, necessary for life. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. Okay? And so the point is that, a certain amount of carbohydrates can be fine, but you can't have a diet that's high in carbohydrates and low in sugar. It's not possible, because by the time it gets to your blood, it's still glucose. Okay? And so that's obviously a big problem. Now, there's been virtually no recognition that high levels of insulin are at least as much of an insult to a person's health as high levels of sugar. Okay. It says, now with the blinders on, the drugs have been and are still being given to lower blood sugar. Even though what they're doing is they're essentially whipping the islet cells of the pancreas to produce more insulin. These unfortunate, overstressed islet cells have been producing excess insulin for years, often decades, to try and compensate for the insulin insensitivity, okay, which is the body's resistance to the insulin, which is type 2 diabetes. Okay? Much like whipping a horse to run faster at the end of a race, it runs faster for a little while, but if you keep doing it, the horse collapses and dies. Okay. So too, the islet cells that manufacture insulin in the pancreas die when drugs, nay, doctors, whip them into producing more insulin when they are tired and sick. Okay. At this point, a diabetic who originally had plenty of insulin being produced, whose problem was merely, a type 2 diabetes, now starts losing the ability to produce insulin itself, and also now attains type 1 diabetes on top of it. Okay. And this is why they call it, died, doctor-induced exacerbation. Okay. Similarly, type 1 diabetics are being told to take as much insulin as necessary to compensate for their immensely inadequate diet, okay, of too much sugar, okay. And so basically they're just saying, well, you're type 1 diabetic, guess what, you just got a raw deal, your body doesn't make insulin. Don't worry about it, because, GlaxoSmithKline makes all the insulin you need, and well, you can just keep injecting it, eat all the sugar you want, there's no problem. Well, the problem with that is that you're no different than the average American who's going to now develop type 2 diabetes. So now, you have type 2 diabetes on top of type 1 diabetes, and they're calling this now type 3 diabetes, or double diabetes, okay? And so, so that's obviously like a really big problem. Okay, when your body gets overexposed to these hormones because of too much sugar and bad food in your diet, they become desensitized to it, okay? It's kind of like being overexposed to an odor in a room. At first you smell it, but if you stay around it long enough, you kind of begin to ignore it. Well, so too does your body do that with insulin. If it's around insulin constantly, pretty soon your body has to make more and more insulin just so that the body can hear the signal, and so just kind of your body starts to tune it out. Okay. So they have examples where type 1 diabetics are taking 2, 3, even 10 times the amount of insulin that they ought to. Okay, and this is obviously, necessitated by following current medical dietary recommendations. Let me say that another way, is that the way that the medical doctors and all the diabetes educators and the way that they're handling it, telling you to eat, makes the problem worse. Swear to you, we're going to go over this, but it's like basically, they're like, which is sad because these people need help and they go to someone for help and they basically tell them, to do, they basically tell them to eat in such a way that it's going to just, make sure that they never get well and it's going to actually make the problem worse. And it's just sickening. And I just can't help but wonder if it's being done on purpose, I guess that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is that it's just completely incompetent how they are handling it, and I personally believe that, there's too many people out there that are just too smart, to really believe that this is an accident, like this is just the best that they could do, It's especially a disgrace that insulin-resistant diabetics, that's type 2 diabetics, become worse following current medical recommendations and treatment. This disease is reversible. Wow. That's something you don't hear very often. And in many cases, curable by paying attention to decades of metabolic science. Okay. In this respect, everyone can be helped. Insulin resistance and leptin resistance are inevitably a result of aging. However, the rate at which this is acquired is indeed the rate of aging itself can be significantly reduced. Okay, and that's because sugar actually speeds up the rate of aging in your body. Okay. So, anyways, that was a very interesting article, and that's why I just kind of wanted to share that almost verbatim. So, we look at, how prevalent is diabetes. Dr. Neil Bernard says that 1 in 3 children that are born in the year 2000 and after are going to be a diabetic. Okay, so this generation, they expect 1 in 3 Americans to be a diabetic. This is right now, I think 15% of the population is diabetic, 14 to 15%. And it says that diabetes is expected to double. Expected to double. So I mean that's that's upwards of one out of 3. And that's radical. And so you have to look at what causes it, because that's something that's not being talked about a lot. In fact, I want to organize this so that I shift it around a little bit. I want to talk about what's being done about it. This should really be up at the top. So I want to find out what's done about it. I wanted to take an interesting view and look at, say, hey, the perspective of, okay, I'm a diabetic. I just found out I have diabetes.
Hi, it's Dr. Mercola coming to you from Maui.
Sorry.
And today I want to continue in our fraud deception.
And see how